Did you know that estimates of Egypt's population during the Exodus are projections from censuses of the Roman era? But these censuses don't include women, children, and slaves? The figure of 2 million Israelites departing from Egypt, derived from the Book of Numbers chapter 1, verse 46, has long been a point of contention in discussions on the historical reliability of the Exodus narrative. Critics frequently assert that this number is implausibly high, citing a population estimative for Egypt of 3 to 5 million. However, this critique often relies on modern assumptions about census taking, assumptions that may not apply to ancient contexts. For example, when analyzing the commonly cited figure of 7 million people in Egypt found in ancient Roman texts, contemporary readers would have understood this as referring to household counts for taxation purposes, not total population figures intended for socio-geographic analysis like today. The central thesis of this work argues that the widespread dismissal of the Exodus population figures as historically implausible arises from this misreading of ancient demographics. First, it does not account that Roman-era census data excluded substantial portions of the population. Second, it fails to account for historical periods when Semitic populations were more numerous and prominent within Egypt. This study aims to clarify the meaning behind the biblical census, suggesting a plausible historical setting when the Semites ruled over most of Egypt. It will also address the common objection that such a mass departure would have caused a collapse in Egyptian society, arguing that, in fact, such a collapse did occur and is historically documented.
This study adopts a multidisciplinary methodology, utilizing critical textual analysis, demographic modeling, and historical synthesis. Textually, it examines the possible contextual meanings of the biblical census. Demographically, it contrasts population estimates for Egypt across different time periods, emphasizing the limitations and biases of the use of Roman-era census data to calculate earlier Egyptian periods. Archaeologically, it highlights evidence from the eastern Nile Delta and the Second Intermediate period that supports the presence of a large Semitic population and a subsequent socio-political collapse.
The Book of Numbers, chapter 1, verse 46, states that 603,000 Israelite men of military age were counted. If this number reflects a normal pre-modern population structure, the total Israelite population would be around 2.5 million. This has led many scholars to reject the biblical account as exaggerated or symbolic. However, this study proposes a re-evaluation of the biblical census. The two biblical censuses, recorded in the Book of Numbers, may not represent a population dwelling in desert encampments, but rather the first census reflects administrative records from a period when Semitic peoples held authority over the Nile Delta, paralleling the 14th and 15th dynasties of Egypt, and the second served as records used to rally troops for a planned military campaign against the centralized powers of Canaan. This interpretation recontextualizes the census as a historical record of Semitic population strength in Egypt, lending credibility to both the number and the possibility of a large-scale departure. It also explains the rapid destabilization that Egypt experienced thereafter, leading into the Second Intermediate period. It aligns with multiple layers of evidence for sudden Semitic migrations, including the demographic collapse in Stratum G, date to the 1700s BCE. Also, the abandonment of a large residential area in Stratum D3, dated to the 1600s BCE, and the violent expulsion in Stratum D1, dated to the 1500s BCE.
To further understand the debate around population plausibility, we must first examine how Roman population estimates have been misapplied. Modern critiques of the Exodus account often rely on backward projections from Roman-era population estimates. Two prominent sources are frequently cited: Diodorus Siculus in the 1st century BCE, who claimed Egypt had 7 million inhabitants under Persian rule, and Josephus in 1st century CE, who stated Egypt had 7.5 million people under the Romans. At first glance, these figures appear to discredit the Exodus narrative. Since Egypt had 7 million people during the height of its imperial control and infrastructure, some models retroject a Bronze Age population of around 3 to 5 million based on agricultural output and settlement size. However, this reasoning fails to account for the nature of Roman censuses. These population counts in the time of the Romans were primarily fiscal instruments designed to measure taxable persons, typically free adult males subject to tribute.
To understand why the figures from Josephus and Diodorus should not be used to discredit the Exodus population, it is crucial to examine what was omitted from these ancient population reports. The Roman census system, especially under Augustus and later emperors, focused on citizens and tributaries. Entire classes of people were not included in the standard count: women, unless they held property; children, particularly those under the age of military service; elderly, often outside the economic base; slaves and forced laborers, who constituted 20 to 30% of the population. When these groups are factored in, the actual population of Roman Egypt could have exceeded 15 million in the Bronze Age period. Thus, using Roman-era population estimates to argue that ancient Egypt couldn't have supported a Semitic population of 2.5 million is methodologically flawed. The biblical census method, excluding women, children, slaves, and the unfit, likely reflected a common ancient practice that contemporary readers would immediately recognize and compare across Roman, Mesopotamian, and Egyptian contexts, as all were standardized to household or military counts without concern for converting them into total population figures.
There are important considerations when approaching the Book of Numbers chapter 1, verse 46, as a literal census rather than a symbolic figure. Departing from the late Bronze Age framework, when Semitic presence had waned, it is more coherent to interpret this number within two historically connected contexts. Both the 14th dynasty, which ruled before 1600 BCE, and the 15th dynasty, which emerged after 1600 BCE, were centered in Avaris. These dynasties were governed by Semitic rulers overseeing a culturally diverse population. Excavations at Tel el-Dab have revealed abundant Semitic material culture, including architecture, pottery, and burials. Given the region's fertility, high settlement density, and weak Egyptian central control, it is plausible that a Semitic population of over 2 million could have inhabited the Delta. The earlier first census may have included the Semitic group known as the Sati, who had peacefully settled in Egypt since the reign of Amenemhat III. This group would later expand into what became the 14th dynasty. Supporting this, Egyptian texts such as the slave list of Sobut have confirmed the presence of Semitic individuals of the Sati ethnicity being enslaved during this period. On another possibility for this period, this is a contrast from the 15th dynasty, which is remembered to have been the ones to have enslaved and oppressed the Egyptian power structures. The second census in Numbers may reflect post-Exodus mobilization or conscription of discontented Levantine populations, including marginalized groups opposed to major Canaanite cities. This broader confederation of Semitic peoples may have shaped the emerging Israelite identity, either making the biblical use of Israelite a flexible socio-political term during the conquest period, or the term being used as a literary synecdoche, where the core group represents the whole.
The absence of direct Egyptian records mentioning the Exodus is often used to question its historicity. Yet the onset of the Second Intermediate Period itself may reflect the type of societal disruption consistent with a mass departure. The Ipuwer Papyrus, though its dating is debated, describes chaos, the breakdown of order, and foreign incursions, paralleling the context of Semitic emergence and Egyptian collapse. Stratum G in Area F of Avaris shows a dramatic population decline dated today to around 1700s, possibly due to an epidemic. Later, Stratum D3 in Area F, dated to around 1600s BCE, reveals abandonment of Avaris core of the Sadi population, while the Hyksos kept growing in another part of the city. The final destruction of Avaris in Stratum D1, Area A, date to around 1500s BCE, aligns with the military campaigns of Ahmose I. After nearly 4 centuries of large-scale Semitic presence in Egypt, from 1800 to 1500 BCE, the Kamos letters, the Tempest Stele, the Rind mathematical papyrus, and the inscription of Ahmose son of Abana collectively attest to the siege, violence, and expulsion of the last major Semitic group, never again to return in significant numbers. Together, these archaeological and textual sources suggest a complex picture of mass migration, social upheaval, and cultural transformation. This is an interpretive framework that supports the plausibility of the Exodus population numbers, historical context, and socio-cultural events. From the 3 possibilities given, 1700s, 1600s, and 1500s BCE, the abandonment of the residential area of the Sadi populating stratum D3 of Area F, dated to 1600s BCE, is particularly compelling because it echoes what Manetho referred to as the blast of God that preceded the arrival of the Hyksos and is contemporaneous to the Thera eruption. Such geological phenomena strongly parallel the biblical account in Exodus chapter 13, verses 21 to 22, where it reports a pillar of cloud by day and a pillar of fire by night in the horizon in front of them. The text reads, "By day the Lord went ahead of them in a pillar of cloud to guide them on their way, and by night in a pillar of fire to give them light, so that they could travel by day or night. Neither the pillar of cloud by day nor the pillar of fire by night left its place in front of the people."
The critique that the Exodus population figures are implausible collapses under closer scrutiny. The biblical census, when interpreted in its proper context, reflects Semitic power under Egyptian rule, not an inflated desert population. Roman-era censuses, commonly used to challenge this narrative, significantly undercounted total populations by excluding women, slaves, children, and the elderly. In a broader and bolder hypothesis, if we also consider the possibility that a pre-Exodus accounted not only for the Semitic population, but for the entire population under direct Semitic rule, then the figures of 2.5 million people, in fact, may be too low when placing it in the Middle Bronze Age context. Thus, the claim that 2 million Israelites would have been half of Egypt's population is not a historical fact, but a rhetorical distortion rooted in modern misunderstanding. Far from undermining the Exodus narrative, the combined archaeological, textual, and demographic evidence affirms a historical memory of Semitic strength, mass movement, and civilizational shift. This study invites readers to reconsider one of the most debated episodes in biblical history through the lens of critical historical synthesis.